March 14, 2015, 12:40 p.m., 911 received a call requesting that they urgently go to a house on Landale Street in Studio City, Los Angeles to carry out a welfare check. Two sisters, 52-year-old Jill Blackstone and 49-year-old Wendy Blackstone, lived at the property, and the call had come in from Jill's friend. She told them Jill had phoned her, saying she had passed out, woken up, and thought she was having a stroke as she couldn't move. She wasn't making much sense on the phone, and her friend was very concerned for both her and her sister's welfare. Her sister Wendy Blackstone was deaf and legally blind, and was cared for by Jill, so if something had happened to Jill, it could mean both of them were in trouble. Jill then abruptly told her friend that Wendy and their 3 dogs were dead. As paramedics and police quickly arrived at the property, they found several typed-out notes around the outside of the house and stuck on the side of a bin near the garage. One note warned people to enter the garage carefully, and another said both parties have do not resuscitate orders. A third post-it note read, Jill Blackstone, brown hair, Wendy Blackstone, red hair. And a final one said that the dogs were trapped in the garage. It was a deeply unsettling series of notes. Authorities opened the garage door after following the instructions on one of the pieces of paper. As soon as they did, 2 dogs came running out. It turned out that the inside had been filled with carbon monoxide, which appeared to have come from the barbecue grill. 49-year-old Wendy Blackstone was unconscious on the ground, with her 3rd dog by her, and it was clear that her dog was already dead. Despite the do not resuscitate orders on the notes, paramedics attempted to save Wendy, but nothing could be done. Wendy Blackstone was pronounced dead at the scene. Another one of her dogs that had fled the garage would tragically later die too. What appeared to have been a handwritten suicide note was found in Wendy's hand, and a half-empty bottle of vodka lay nearby too. Wendy's feet were near the barbecue, and there was also a bin which was full of ash and smoking slightly. In the house upstairs, they found Jill lying on the bed half-naked, slurring and slow with her words. She was rushed to hospital where she stayed for 2 days to be treated for severe carbon monoxide poisoning. Detectives said it was a very perplexing and strange case, and something wasn't making sense. But with Jill in hospital and in no place to talk, all they could do was wait and look into the sisters' history, lives, and talk to the neighbors. Jill and Wendy Blackstone worked from home running their own businesses, which helped to support Wendy even more, as it meant she didn't need to leave the house much, and Jill could help care for her. By all accounts, her sister was her primary caregiver. Wendy's life had always revolved around animals, and everybody said she was the happiest when she was with them. When she and her sister Jill moved in together 7 years before, starting an animal rescue business in their home seemed like a no-brainer. It was called Thumping Tails Animal Rescue Center, and they always told people how proud they were of it and how much they loved what they did. Before working with animals, however, Jill Blackstone had actually worked in television production for many years and was fairly well known in these circles. Although her IMDb credits list only 5 projects, multiple sources say she had production roles on some of the biggest reality shows of the 90s and early 2000s. The Jerry Springer Show, The Osbournes, Sally Jessy Raphael, Rosie, Divorce Court, Dr. Drew, and over 100 episodes of Family Court with Judge Penny. She was even nominated for a Cable ACE Award in 1993. As her production work started to slow down around 2009, she and her sister moved in together and started running the business. Jill's LinkedIn profile read, "But sadly, the not-for-profit animal rescue business they loved so much was proving very costly to run." As detectives looked into the sisters' finances, it showed that Jill was bleeding money and drowning in debt. She owed almost $10,000 to animal hospitals and various vets. She owed family members money, had unpaid medical bills, and was thousands of dollars in on different credit cards. The monthly mortgage repayments alone cost almost $6,000. A few years before, Jill had actually filed for bankruptcy, reportedly being around $1.4 million in debt and owing her sister Wendy over $100,000 too. The pair had recently sold their $950,000 home, but were still living in it while they waited for the new owners to take possession. According to the neighbors, however, they were having trouble finding somewhere else to live, given all the pets and the extra things that Wendy needed in place to support her. People said Jill had become more and more withdrawn as the stress of the move and finances were getting to her. The relationship between the sisters and their parents was strained as well, and Jill told people she had spoken to them about adapting their home so they could also help care for Wendy, but due to their age, they said it just wasn't going to work. And now, 7 years after they bought their house in Studio City and moved in together, Wendy and her dogs were now dead and Jill was very ill in hospital and lucky to be alive. Although you can never know what is going on in someone else's world or mind, neighbors said that the thought of Wendy taking her own life was completely shocking. Wendy always seemed happy and chatty, and her dogs and the business really were her whole world. The thought of not only leaving her beloved pets behind, but poisoning them to death was quite unbelievable. Wendy's autopsy showed no outward signs of trauma, and the toxicology report revealed there was no alcohol in her system, despite the bottle of vodka next to her. The Los Angeles County coroner recorded her death as being from the combined effects of smoke inhalation and an overdose of alprazolam, but her manner of death was left undetermined. The more the authorities looked into it, the stranger it all became. As soon as Jill was well enough to talk, she gave police her statement. At first, she denied saying that she had told anyone that Wendy and the dogs were dead, and claimed she had no idea how they came to be there. She said all she remembered was being in the garage and starting up the barbecue to keep the space warm, before lighting some of the barbecue briquettes in the metal can so she and Wendy could toast marshmallows. But both the barbecue and the metal can were enclosed in the garage, not outside in the garden as would be expected for obvious reasons, and this was another red flag. After this, she said she went outside where she passed out on the ground and woke up with the sun burning her face. She then called her friend and said she thought she was having a stroke, just as her friend had told the police. But to the detectives, there were so many inconsistencies and holes in the story, they started asking more questions. Experts that had been examining the note found in Wendy's hand now felt strongly that it had been written by Jill and not Wendy. It was not signed by Wendy, nor were any of the other notes outside the house either. Given everything the police had uncovered in the 2 days Jill was in hospital, they believed that Jill had drugged her younger sister before dragging her into the garage where the dogs followed or were led as well. She then lit the grill, which started burning and leaking carbon monoxide, and staged the scene to look like Wendy had taken her own life by placing the note in her hand and notes around the property. Jill vehemently denied this and said just like her sister, she had devoted her life to saving animals and people and also helping Wendy. She said she would never want to bring her harm. "I know what it looks like. This was not me. It's just not," she said. "I'm so alone. People at 52, they have kids, they have spouses, they have adults who can help. It was all on me. I'm freaking tired because I have lupus," Jill added. The one note that read, Jill Blackstone brown hair and Wendy Blackstone red hair, and the other that said both parties have do not resuscitate orders did imply that authorities would need this to identify both women, which further inferred that Jill had intended to no longer be alive when the police entered the home. Then, to their surprise, Jill claimed she was carrying out her younger sister's wishes, and that the pair had made a pact to die together. She said she was meant to die as well, but called a friend for help at the last second. But authorities weren't convinced and thought that even this was an attempt at staging and setting the scene to try and get away with murder. They placed Jill Blackstone under arrest for the murder of her sister Wendy and sent their findings to the district attorney's office. But after they reviewed everything, the DA's office ordered she be released after 4 days. The DA's office declined to file charges, saying there wasn't enough evidence and they needed the police to give them more. Neighbors said that Jill returned home in tears, and after this she was barely seen out. Sources said she moved to New Jersey to live closer to relatives some time later. As word started to spread, people started wondering if Jill's financial issues were a factor in what had happened. That was not the answer to her problems, one neighbor said. She was trying to find a foundation that would help them and help financially take care of her sister, but I don't think she got very far. No one had to die over money. There had to be other options. Another said they were having a hard time finding a new home because the sister that died was very ill. She couldn't see, she couldn't hear, she was housebound. So she needed to find a house that could accommodate her sister with the illness and the dogs. Evidently the pressure was intense on them, but nobody expected this to happen. She loved her dogs desperately. They were her world. So why would she do that? It breaks my heart. It really does. It sickens me, someone else commented. Things then went very quiet. Wendy's death was still undetermined and Jill was no longer in the state. But behind the scenes, an arduous investigation was underway. Homicide detectives and arson investigators from the Los Angeles Fire Department were conducting separate investigations and assessments that would last 2 years and take us to the spring of 2018. In March that year, the LAPD made an announcement. Jill was located at a hospital in Baltimore where she was placed under arrest and charged with the murder of her sister and 3 counts of animal cruelty. Her bail was set at over $2 million and she was extradited back to California. Prosecutors said that the reason things took so long was because the biological and toxic evidence had been destroyed long before they had filed a case, meaning they essentially had to start from scratch again. If found guilty at trial, she was facing a life sentence, and after several delayed hearings, things finally started moving ahead. Police and prosecutors believed the motive for murder was Jill's frustration at being forced to provide Wendy long-term care, as well as the associated financial hardship. Some detectives felt that Jill might have planned what was going to be a murder-suicide, but whereas Jill was found and saved, Wendy couldn't be. However, in court, prosecutors disagreed with this theory and said there is reasonable inference that Wendy Blackstone did not consent to and was not aware of the defendant's plan. Jill's lawyer was already in the process of trying to get the murder charge reduced to manslaughter, which would carry a far lesser sentence. He also argued that the original interview the police had conducted in the hospital should be thrown out on the grounds that she was not in a clear state of mind and couldn't properly consent to it. Her lawyer called the case a family tragedy and said that Jill and Wendy's parents didn't want to see their daughter die in prison, having already lost their other daughter. He called the evidence they had against her fake, and the whole situation was nothing more than a very tragic accident. He claimed that Wendy was the one that had been barbecuing food for the pair of them, and she had died of accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. He added that the claims of there being any kind of fire inside the garage was not true, but this completely contradicted the coroner's findings. It was then announced that Jill would be taking a plea. In court, she arrived in a wheelchair with her lawyer saying her health had taken a turn, and she was now suffering from Parkinson's disease as well as lupus. February 2022. Jill Blackstone pleaded guilty to 1 felony count of voluntary manslaughter, along with 3 felony counts of animal cruelty. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Just as the police had said from the beginning, it was a very perplexing and complicated case, with numerous theories and ideas about what had happened, how it came to be, and the ins and outs of any conversations that had happened prior. And the reality is, it really is impossible to know. Whether there was a pact of sorts or not, whether it was all over money or not, these questions will probably never be answered. All we know is that 49-year-old Wendy and the dogs that she loved so much passed away in truly horrendous circumstances, and they are all missed dearly by the Blackstones' friends, family, and neighbors. Jassy Correa, a young woman and her friends departed from a party on the evening of February 23, 2019. As per their usual routine, they had a pleasant time and drove away. However, Jassy decided to stay back and find a ride home. Unfortunately, she mistakenly entered the wrong car, leading to a disagreement with the driver. This altercation caught the attention of a nearby man. Subsequently, Jassy left with this individual and she never reappeared. 5 days later, law enforcement officers halted a vehicle displaying suspicious markings. The discovery they made inside would haunt them for the remainder of their lives. Jassy Correa had eagerly anticipated celebrating her 23rd birthday at a renowned entertainment venue in Boston. Regrettably, Jassy never returned home, shattering the evening that was meant to be filled with laughter and celebration alongside her friends. This distressing disappearance swiftly garnered substantial media coverage and received extensive attention from various television stations in the United States. Jassy's life story was far from a fairy tale. A year prior to the events we are about to delve into, she had suffered a violent assault at the hands of Miguel Castro, the father of her daughter, Gabriela. Despite her attempts to leave him, Castro's aggression escalated, resulting in severe physical abuse. In response, Jassy contacted the police, who intervened and successfully convicted Castro, resulting in a 4-year prison sentence. Jassy worked diligently as a waiter at the renowned Del Frisco restaurant in Boston. She cherished capturing moments through photography and dancing, finding joy in every second spent with her daughter and friends. Visiting the park with Gabriello was a source of happiness, although now tinged with sadness. On the evening of February 23, 2019, dressed in a new orange jumpsuit, Jassy entrusted her 2-year-old daughter to her family's care in order to celebrate her birthday. The chosen venue was Venue, a lively nightclub located in Boston's Theater District on Warrington Street. According to a friend, the night was filled with joy as they danced and indulged in champagne. After the club closed, Jassy and 2 friends emerged into the night. However, as is often the case in such situations, the friends parted ways, leaving Jassy alone. That was the last time she was seen. Attempts to contact her were futile, as her phone went straight to voicemail. For 2 agonizing days, there was no news of Jassy. Her family, fraught with worry, had no idea of her whereabouts since that fateful Sunday morning. On February 26th, her father, Dukin Korea, along with a friend, approached the police to report Jassy's mysterious disappearance. The police launched a full-scale investigation, beginning with tracing her steps after leaving the nightclub. Flyers were distributed across the city, imploring the public for any information. Despite interviewing her friends who were with her that night, the investigation hit a roadblock. None of them knew where she had gone after leaving the venue. Their farewell that night was the last interaction they had with Jassy. In their meticulous investigation into Jassy Korea's disappearance, the police scrutinized witness accounts and analyzed CCTV footage from both the nightclub and the surrounding streets. A critical piece of footage from Tremont Street captured at 2:14 a.m. revealed Jassy outside the nightclub, engaging with several individuals after leaving the club. The video showed a visibly inebriated Jassy mistakenly entering an Uber she hadn't ordered, leading to a heated argument with the driver, who subsequently forced her out of the vehicle. The situation escalated as Jassy continued to argue with the Uber driver. It was at this juncture that an unknown man approached her, seemingly offering assistance. The footage captured a disturbing interaction as the man held onto Jassy's hands, restraining her despite her attempts to leave. The CCTV then recorded the chilling moment Jassy was coerced into leaving the area with this stranger. The gravity of the situation became apparent. Jassy had an encounter with a predator without her knowledge. Additional video evidence revealed a chilling scene. In an attempt to lighten the atmosphere, Jassy playfully climbed onto the man's back. Subsequently, he transported her to his vehicle, and within a mere 14 minutes, they vanished from the camera's sight. Confronted with these distressing images, the police were tasked with unraveling a multitude of unanswered questions. The primary concern revolved around the identity of this enigmatic man and his intentions. The pressing query remained: where had he taken Jassy? The investigation intensified as the police diligently pieced together the events of that fateful night, hoping to uncover the truth behind Jassy's disappearance. The breakthrough in Jassy Korea's case came swiftly when the police identified the man accompanying her as 32-year-old Lewis Coleman. Despite hailing from a respected family and reportedly holding a master's degree in physics, Coleman had no prior encounters with the law. Interestingly, police records indicated that Coleman did not own a registered vehicle. However, it was discovered that his mother, a California resident, possessed a red 2016 Buick. The same make of car captured in the CCTV footage. Coleman resided in Providence, Rhode Island, approximately 50 miles away from the Venue nightclub in Boston. Upon arriving at his Providence home, the police found it vacant. The surveillance cameras in and around his apartment complex grimly confirmed the worst fears of the investigators and Jassy's family. Typically, the journey from the nightclub to Coleman's apartment would take an hour. However, the timeline of events suggested that Coleman must have made a stop along the way. He only arrived at his apartment around 4:15 a.m. on Sunday, approximately 2 hours after being seen leaving with Jassy. Intriguingly, the following day Coleman sent an email to his colleagues, citing illness as the reason for his absence and expressing his intention to return in a few days. Hello everyone, I wanted to inform you that I am still on sick leave. I will be returning to work in a few days. This message raised suspicions as it seemed like Coleman was trying to buy time to hide evidence related to the crime. Investigators began piecing together his actions over the next 2 days, which further supported this theory. The police investigation into Jassy Correa's disappearance uncovered a series of disturbing CCTV footage that shed light on the tragic events that followed her encounter with Lewis Coleman. Special Agent Thomas Zukaskas described a crucial piece of showing Coleman carrying a motionless woman, believed to be Jassy, into his apartment building at around 4:27 a.m. This immediately raised concerns as Jassy appeared to be either unconscious or in a worse condition. On February 26th, the day Jassy's father reported her missing, Coleman was seen at Walmart purchasing items that later seemed incriminating. These items included Tyvek suits, duct tape, candles, electrical tape, a mask, surgical gloves, safety goggles, a respirator, bleach, and more. His actions suggested a desperate attempt to cover up a heinous act. The following day, while Jassy's loved ones were distributing missing person flyers, Coleman returned to Walmart and bought a large suitcase and a canister. Later that evening, CCTV footage captured him entering his apartment with the new suitcase, and in the early hours of February 28th, he was seen wheeling it out to his car. The footage was distressing, depicting Coleman's struggle to load the heavy suitcase into the trunk. The United States Attorney for Massachusetts, Andrew Lelling, later confirmed that Jassy Correa had not left Coleman's apartment since the morning of February 24th. The police, armed with a search warrant, discovered incriminating items in Coleman's apartment and a nearby dumpster, such as stained jeans, hooded coveralls, and items purchased from Walmart. On February 28th, when the police stopped Coleman near Wilmington, Delaware, they made a grim discovery in the trunk of his car. Jassy's body, concealed in a sofa cushion cover, and a black trash bag inside the suitcase. A forensic examination revealed that she had been strangled and suffered blunt force trauma. And there was DNA evidence linking Coleman to the crime. The tragedy of Jassy's untimely death was further compounded by the loss experienced by her 2-year-old daughter. Boston authorities, when visiting the Correa family, promised to seek justice for Jassy. Amidst this, some social media users questioned Jassy's decision to be out alone at night. However, Suffolk District Attorney Rachel Rollins emphasized that the focus should not be on victim blaming, but rather on addressing the underlying issues of violence against women. Rollins called for a shift in societal conversation, urging men to take responsibility and actively combat violence against women in all aspects of life. Lewis Coleman faced serious charges of kidnapping, resulting in death, a crime that could carry the death penalty or life imprisonment. However, in November 2019, prosecutors decided against seeking the death penalty, setting the stage for a trial filled with complex evidence and emotional testimony. During the trial, prosecutors presented a compelling case, including a disturbing video of tracking Jassy Correa's body into his Providence apartment. The prosecution also emphasized Coleman's disturbing online searches after the abduction, which included inquiries about fitting a body into a suitcase and extracting a tooth. Coleman's defense team, led by attorney David Hughes, questioned the relevance of this evidence to the kidnapping charge. Hughes argued that the focus should be on the specific elements of the kidnapping allegation rather than Coleman's actions following Correa's death. The trial revealed a complex narrative of the events leading up to Jassy's tragic demise. Prosecutors established that Coleman was present in the same nightclub as Jassy and her friends, where he interacted with another woman, not Jassy, and even exchanged phone numbers and texts with her. However, the situation took a dark turn when, according to prosecutors, Coleman deceived Jassy into believing he would drive her to her friend's apartment, ultimately leading to her death. In contrast, the defense portrayed Jassy as the aggressor, suggesting that a spontaneous fight between her and Coleman resulted in the fatal altercation. They argued that this was not a premeditated crime, despite the prosecution's claim that Coleman, who was significantly larger than Jassy, was unlikely to be overpowered by her. Adding complexity to the defense's narrative were toxicology reports showing the presence of alcohol and prohibited substances in Jassy's system. Despite these arguments, the jury found Coleman guilty of kidnapping, resulting in death in June 2022. In October 2022, the court sentenced 36-year-old Lewis Coleman to life imprisonment without parole and also ordered him to pay approximately $60,000 in compensation to Jassie's family. Joshua Levy, the first assistant United States attorney, emphasized the irreversible harm and suffering inflicted by Coleman on Jassie and her family in a poignant statement. Levy highlighted Coleman's lack of remorse and his elaborate efforts to conceal his heinous crime. The conclusion of the case, although unable to ease the enduring pain felt by Jassie's family, served as a significant moment for the community that had been deeply affected. The unanswered question regarding Coleman's intentions with Jassie's body remained, hauntingly reminding everyone of the tragedy befell a young mother and the lasting impact it had on those she left behind. On the morning of Saturday, March 9, 2019, St. Peter's Parish in Dorchester was filled with a solemn gathering, united in grief to bid farewell to Jassie Correa. The atmosphere was heavy with sorrows. Family, friends, and community members came together to honor her memory. Some attendees chose to wear all white as a symbol of mourning, while others adorned themselves with buttons, shirts, and sweatshirts bearing Jassie's image and the poignant slogan, "Justice for Jassie." During the ceremony, Jassie's cousin and best friend, Michaela de Andrade, shared half-felt words that expressed both deep sadness and a strong belief that Jassie's untimely passing held meaning. "We may not understand why, but God knows. I trust with all my heart that her death was not in vain," DeAndre had conveyed with great emotion. Boston Mayor Marty Walsh in his eulogy reflected on the tragedy and pledged to work towards creating a safer world for women. He emphasized that young women should be able to celebrate their birthdays without fear and return safely to their children and families. Walsh empathized with the unimaginable pain endured by Jassie's family. Jassie's father, Duclan Correa, addressed the congregation of over 200 people, expressing gratitude for the overwhelming support from the city and the tireless efforts of law enforcement across 3 states. Among the attendees was Jassie's mother, who had not seen her daughter in 20 years and had traveled from Portugal, exemplifying the far-reaching impact of the tragedy. The church was filled to capacity with many people standing along the back wall, a testament to the love and respect held for Jassie. In his final tribute, the Waken Korea's words resonated with both sorrow and love. "Rest in paradise, my dear Jassie. Rest in peace, my dear child." The community's unwavering presence and unity acted as a poignant testament to Jassie's life and the shared grief over the untimely loss of a beloved soul. Angela Wong, an 11-year-old resident of Massapequa, New York, bid farewell to her brother on July 17, 1984, and headed towards a nearby mall to spend time with friends. Tragically, she never made it back home. The search for Angela ended in a horrifying manner the next day when her lifeless, bloodied, and unclothed body was discovered in a wooded area near her house. The mysterious circumstances surrounding her fate raised unsettling questions. Was she being followed? Did she unknowingly encounter someone with malicious intentions? Or was this a premeditated attack? The answers to this chilling enigma remained hidden within the very shadows of Angela's former home. Massapequa, New York, nestled on the south shore of Long Island, is a hidden treasure with a rich history. Originally inhabited by Native American tribes, European settlers arrived in the 17th century, and the area was named after the Massapequa tribe. It gradually transformed into a farming community and later became a desirable destination for those seeking a quintessential Long Island lifestyle. Today, with a population exceeding 22,000, the main allure of this place lies in its convenient access to stunning beaches, ideal for sunbathing and water sports during the summer season. Unfortunately, even in such a locale, violent crimes can occur. On Tuesday, July 17, 1984, Massapequa buzzed with excitement as Stars Disco, a popular local venue, hosted a breakdancing contest. Throughout the afternoon, a group of kids dedicated themselves to perfecting their moves for the evening's event. The practice sessions took place in Angela Wong Jr.'s family garage, where Angela, his younger sister, was allowed to join in. Around 4:20 p.m., the practice concluded and the group dispersed. Angela had informed her brother about her plan to visit the nearby mall to meet some friends. Her older brother accompanied her part of the way before heading back home. Later that evening, Angela was supposed to go to the nightclub to enjoy the performances, but she never arrived. It wasn't until Angela returned home and his mother, Tony Angelo, told him that his younger sister hadn't come back that he became worried. The family then started searching for her in the neighborhood. The next morning, they contacted the authorities, leading to an immediate search effort. Angela's father, Angelo Wong Sr., joined forces with the officers to help in the search. As time passed without any success, a sense of dread set in, hinting that something terrible had happened. Sadly, the worst was confirmed when Nassau County Police Officer Linda Curtis discovered the body of a young girl in a wooded area behind 29 Nancy Place East, Massapequa, Nassau County, New York. The girl, identified as 11-year-old Angela, was found partially clothed with her head submerged at the edge of a pond near her home. She had bruises and abrasions on her face, and it seemed like a heavy log had been used to hold her head underwater. The medical examiner determined that she had drowned due to asphyxiation. Despite being partially clothed, there were no signs of assault on her body. On the same day, Nassau County Homicide Detective John Sharkey took over the case and began investigating Angela's final day. The main question was who, besides her brother, had seen her last in the neighborhood. After receiving numerous tips and conducting multiple interviews, the investigation eventually honed in on Angela's inner circle, specifically the group that had gathered at the Wong residence that afternoon. The police systematically interviewed each individual, focusing on their whereabouts between 4:30 and 5 o'clock in the evening, the critical window during which Angelo was believed to have been murdered. As the interviews progressed, all but one person were cleared of suspicion. Manuel Pacheco, a 15-year-old boy from the neighborhood, stood out due to his reputation as a ladies' man. During his interview, Pacheco claimed to have left the Wong residence around 4:20 p.m. and headed north towards his own home. According to him, he briefly saw Angela walking alongside a young boy, vaguely described as wearing a black cutoff shirt. However, Pacheco couldn't provide any further details about this male individual. He stated that he'd then return home, spending the next hour showering and preparing for a breakdancing contest. Detective Sharkey found Pacheco's story unverifiable and began to suspect that something was amiss. The location where Angela's body was discovered also raised suspicions. It was a commonly used shortcut to the mall, and Angela's family confirmed that she wouldn't have taken that route unless accompanied by someone she trusted. With these doubts in mind, Detective Sharkey decided to reevaluate the case from a fresh perspective. On August 6, 1984, a woman named Nkaruka Okoye approached Detective Sharkey at the command bus station in front of the Wong family home. Ms. Okoye informed him that she resided on Ford Drive West and had witnessed Angela Wong and Manuel walking and conversing together at 4:20 p.m. on July 17, 1984. She specifically remembered the day because it was the day before her 13th birthday and the time because she was on her way to a 4.30 showing of the movie Gremlins. Furthermore, she had a vivid recollection of Pacheco, primarily due to her infatuation with him. Nearly a year later, detectives received a promising lead. In August 1985, Virginia Stone contacted the Nassau County Police Department, claiming that her foster daughter, known only as Margaret, had disclosed that Manuel Pacheco was responsible for Angela Wong's murder. Acting on this tip, NCPD Detective Arnold Liner interviewed Virginia on September 19, 1985. Virginia provided additional information, stating that Pacheco had been at a pizzeria with Margaret and 3 other young women when he allegedly confessed to them about killing Angela. According to Virginia, Pacheco explained that during a confrontation in the woods, Angela scratched and slapped him multiple times, resulting in her accidental death. Detective Sharkey proceeded to interview all 3 of the young women. While 2 of them couldn't confirm Pacheco's admission, Margaret mentioned that although he had never confessed to her, was a rumor circulating at school about his involvement in Angela's murder. Unfortunately, the investigation once again reached a frustrating dead end. Despite their suspicions, detectives lacked concrete evidence against Pacheco or any other suspect. Consequently, the case quickly went cold. On January 11, 1990, Detective John Sharkey visited Pacheco's residence in Massapequa. He explained that the investigation into Angel Wong's death was still ongoing and requested further questioning. Pacheco agreed to continue the conversation at Nassau County Police Headquarters, but did not disclose any incriminating details. Following their interview at the headquarters, Pacheco also consented to undergo a polygraph test. However, during the test, Pacheco was deemed unsuitable for testing due to his inability to remain still and constant squirming in the chair. Detective Sharkey had informed him that, based on his behavior, it seemed that Pacheco had failed the polygraph test. Pacheco then explained that he couldn't sit still due to back pain from an injury sustained in a car accident. Interestingly, this was the first time he mentioned any back pain during the 2-hour conversation with Detective Sharkey at the headquarters. Despite Manuel Pacheco being the prime suspect in Angela's murder, there wasn't enough probable cause to make an arrest. After the interview, Pacheco relocated to California, which further complicated the case. Unfortunately, for the next decade, there was no progress in the investigation. In 1999, Detective Sharkey retired from the Nassau County Police Department, and he handed the case over to Nassau County Homicide Detective Michael Kuhn. Continuing the investigation in 2002, Kuhn traveled to Los Angeles, where Pacheco had been residing since 1990, to gather further evidence against him. By this time, Pacheco, now working as a personal fitness trainer, was in relationships with 3 women and had fathered 6 children. However, all of them lived in fear of his volatile temper, with one of his girlfriends even having obtained a restraining order against him. On January 8, 2002, Detective Cun had a conversation with one of Pacheco's former acquaintances named Maureen Geekin in Las Vegas, Nevada. Jagan disclosed to him conversations she had in the past with Pacheco regarding the death of Angela Wong. In March 2002, Detective Kuhn spoke with Raluca de Osiflescu, one of Pacheco's former girlfriends. She revealed that Pacheco had beaten her on one occasion and later apologized, comparing it to the time he couldn't control himself from killing his cousin. He went on to explain that he killed his cousin in a wooded area in New York by drowning her and placing a log over her head. Another one of his girlfriends, Courtney Bennett, also disclosed that he confessed to killing Angela. After obtaining this crucial evidence, the detectives in New York were prepared to apprehend Pacheco. However, their plans were put on hold when Pacheco was taken into custody on March 20, 2002, for assaulting his girlfriend and their 9-year-old daughter. Nassau County Homicide Detective Brian Parpin, accompanied by Detective Kuhn, visited Pacheco in custody to discuss the case. Nevertheless, as soon as they mentioned Angela Wong's death, Pacheco requested legal representation, abruptly ending the conversation. Eventually, in June 2002, Pacheco was extradited to Nassau County, New York, to stand trial for Angela Wong's murder almost 20 years after the crime took place. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Manuel Pacheco opted to plead not guilty and take his chances. During the 2004 trial, another significant revelation came to light. Margaret Massa, a former friend of Pacheco, testified that in 1985 he had confessed to killing Angela after she resisted his advances. He claimed it was to avoid trouble. Despite Pacheco's persistent denial and insistence on his innocence throughout the trial, the jury remained unconvinced. After just 7 hours of deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict. Since Pacheco was a minor at the time of the murder, he received a sentence of 9 years to life in prison in March 2004, the maximum punishment allowed by the court. After serving 18 years behind bars, Pacheco was granted parole in 2022. In a strange twist of fate, one of Pacheco's biological children was raised by a family who had tragically lost their loved ones at his hands. Angela's brother, Angela Wong Jr., married Rachel, a woman who had a son with Pacheco. In the midst of unfathomable sorrow, this extraordinary tale showcases the incredible capacity of certain individuals to extend love and compassion towards others, despite their profound attachment to the very cause of their anguish. Hull, East Yorkshire in England, home to the University of Hull, which looks after around 14,000 students. Amongst those students was 21-year-old Liberty Squire, who went by Libby. Libby was in her second year and had thrived at university. She had done well in her studies, enjoyed the social aspect that being at university gave her, and had a great group of friends. Those that knew her said she was wickedly fun, talented, witty, and always made an effort to include everybody. She was a doting big sister to her brother and two sisters and was very close to her mother Lisa and father Russell. Libby had always been very bright and pushed herself hard to achieve good grades, but family said she definitely held herself to an impossibly high standard. Her mental health soon started suffering. She was battling an eating disorder, self-harming, and her grades were slipping. She continued to push through and persevered to get her A-levels and was beaming when she was accepted into university to study philosophy. Lisa said she was worried about her daughter being so far away, not wanting her mental health to start suffering again. But Libby was adamant it was for the best and couldn't wait for a fresh start. She took a gap year and went traveling in Paris, and by the time she got back, she was more than ready to move into the next phase of her life. She was in a strong relationship with her boyfriend of 3 years, Connor, with him saying she was the most interesting person he'd ever met, caring and empathetic. "I know it's easy to say at my age, but I knew she was the person for me," he recalled. Libby was always busy and had lots of plans already made for when she graduated. She wanted to go traveling with her housemates and hopefully move into journalism. University had brought out another side in her, and Connor said she was more confident and happy than ever. On January 31st, 2019 at 8:30 p.m., Libby left her student accommodation on Wellesley Avenue, and she and some friends walked to another student house. Most students nearby were going out, and the plan was that Libby and her group of friends would have some drinks, play some games, catch up, and then head out to a popular nearby club called the Welly. At around 10 p.m., she sent Connor a text message to say goodnight as she was leaving her phone at home. And at 11:20, the group arrived at the nightclub, picked up by CCTV as they walked in. Libby was refused entry. She was clearly intoxicated and struggling to walk or stand, and the security team turned her away, saying she'd already had too much to drink. They regrouped, and 10 minutes later, her friends put her into a taxi, gave the driver some money, and told him to take her back home. They watched as the taxi drove off and carried on with their night. Just before 3 a.m., the group, who were now starting to arrive home and wind down, sent a text message to a housemate of Libby's that had stayed at home to see how she was. To their alarm, they said Libby hadn't come home, and they hadn't seen or heard from her. They assumed that she was still out at the club. Everybody started calling around other people's homes, wondering if she'd gone there. Not one person had seen her, and as her phone was still at home, they couldn't get hold of her that way either. They also found her house keys in the garden too. Not only was Libby very intoxicated, it was bitterly cold outside and snow was covering parts of the road. They knew this wasn't safe if she was still out there, and they called the police right away. The police were definitely concerned, and the investigation moved quickly. Was it possible that she was struggling with her mental health again, and this had caused her to run away, they wondered. Her friends and family said they had to consider every possibility, but this one was highly unlikely. She had been in the best of spirits, loved her housemates, and had just received great marks and feedback from her Christmas assignments. Within just a few hours, the media was running with the story, and Libby was at the forefront of everybody's minds. The police were able to track down the taxi driver. He said he had dropped her at Wellesley Avenue, and when he glanced back, he saw her walking towards her front door. For whatever reason, Libby hadn't gone inside. Fortunately, the streets were covered by CCTV, and knowing the time she was placed in the taxi, it wasn't hard to find her and track where she had walked after getting out of the cab. Cameras showed Libby walking on the roads nearby at 11:37 p.m. At 11:40 p.m., two passersby stopped to try and help her when they found her lying in the snow. They said Libby was crying and agitated, but didn't want any help and was snappy and incoherent. They felt there was nothing they could do. A group of students then saw her outside their house and invited her in to check that she was okay, but she carried on walking, seemingly aimlessly. And authorities said given how cold it was that early morning, she could well have been suffering from the early side effects of hypothermia. It wasn't looking good. However, police said they were still treating it as a missing persons inquiry, although reporters said behind the scenes, the detectives were actually looking at it as an abduction. Libby's parents began making appeals. The search parties were huge and Libby's name was all over social media and the news. The university started collaborating with the police to arrange times and places to go out searching. Police asked residents to check their gardens, sheds, and outbuildings to see if she may have taken shelter there. Door-to-door inquiries were being carried out and bins and drains were being searched. Clothing that matched what she was wearing that night started circulating, and they asked people spotted on the CCTV around the same time and area to please come forward. It was now national news and the biggest investigation in Humberside Police's history. Her phone was looked at, but there was no evidence on this either to indicate that she had met up with anybody. Absolutely nothing was turning up, and it really was down to the cameras to carry on piecing the jigsaw together. Finally, police would receive their first big tip. A resident that lived near Oaks Road playing fields said he heard a woman screaming at around midnight, and the noise was heard coming from around the wooded area. It was so loud it woke him up, and he knew the time was exact because he had checked his phone. He looked out of his window to see a man hurrying towards a car. Using this time frame, police went back and searched through the cameras again and started working in reverse order. If what the neighbor heard was indeed Libby, meant there was around a 30 to 40-minute window between when she was first seen walking around the streets to that specific point in time. It had definitely narrowed a lot down. Finally, they saw something on the footage. They noticed a silver Vauxhall Astra had been circulating the area for hours before Libby was last seen. It was just driving round and round, for seemingly no reason. Just before midnight, this very car was seen pulling in at the end of the road, close to where Libby was walking. A person stepped out and crossed the road quickly to follow her. Libby appeared to be stood still near the bus stop, but she was actually walking back in the direction of her house. The person then crossed back over and started walking along the other side of the road. It appeared that whoever it was had crossed the road to see who, if anyone, Libby was with, engage what the situation was. They stopped for a minute before crossing back over the road and talking to Libby. 5 minutes then passed when the pair were walking together, but in the opposite direction Libby had been heading in. Libby was on the pavement and the driver was sat in the car. Authorities saw a few more headlights come and go and believed whoever the driver was waiting for the coast to be clear before continuing on. At 12:08 a.m., Libby got inside whoever's vehicle it was and the car drove off. Her watch was later found in that exact area. Something had caused it to come off, and police theorized that there was likely a point where either the driver physically tried to coax her in or grabbed her arm to pull her in. It was such a vital piece of footage, one that if the car had been parked even a foot further away, would probably have been useless. They now had a description of the car, and going off of what the resident had said, a time frame and a potential location for where the car had ended up with Libby. Sure enough, the car was tracked as it pulled into Oak Road's playing fields. 10 minutes then passed, and this was around the time the resident heard the screams. The car lights then came on and the car exited the fields and headed back out onto the streets. 2 women then also came forward with a separate complaint, but one that would ultimately be a huge lead as well. They reported that at around 3 a.m., a man had stepped out in front of them on the streets and started masturbating. They were horrified, but he didn't seem bothered at all, relishing in just how uncomfortable they were. Using this time, location, and description, they found the man in question. Everything matched up, and it was the same man in the same car. They now had a clear image of their person of interest. Following his movements in the hours before and days afterwards, they got a hit on the car's number plate. On February 6th, the police announced that they had made an arrest in connection with Libby's disappearance. The person they had arrested would turn out to be 24-year-old Pavel Relevich, a married father of 2 who worked as a butcher. Pavel had moved to the UK from Poland as a teenager and went to a catering college near Hull. And as well as being arrested on suspicion of the abduction of Libby, he was also arrested for sexual offenses. They finally had their person of interest in custody. Neighbors said all they saw was a hardworking man, someone who enjoyed the gym, baking, and long walks with his young family. He was always friendly, polite, and smiley. There was nothing untoward at all. But little did anyone know, Pavel would soon rack up a string of crimes, and police had actually just caught a very dangerous individual. Pavel lived very close to where Libby was last seen and the fields from where the screams had come from. After taking his prints in a DNA sample, It turned out he was linked to several other crimes going back almost 2 years. For a long time, Pavel had been breaking into people's homes, peering through windows, watching couples have sex, and following women on the streets, often exposing himself to them. Sometimes he would break into houses, steal underwear, and leave used condoms around. One woman woke up one night to find Pavel staring at her through the glass of her bedroom door. She texted her housemates, who chased him out and tried to get a photo, but it just wasn't clear enough. Another time he did this, it was actually on the same street that Libby lived on. Although fingerprints were often lifted and DNA was taken from the houses, Pavel had no criminal record and a match to him was never made. But now there was, and a lot of matches to say the least. According to sources, it was fairly obvious that Pavel was a sexual deviant from an early age, and by his own admission he was unable to control his urges and had an addiction to hardcore and violent pornography. He would often tell his wife he was going for an evening run, but instead he would prowl the streets looking for open windows to look in or climb through, or women walking alone so he could follow them and expose himself. It had now been 7 days since Libby had gone missing, and the police were conducting a thorough review of their person of interest's house and vehicle. Whilst his house turned up nothing, inside his vehicle was a different story. There was dirty underwear, sex toys, used condoms, photographs of women clearly taken without their permission, and various items that he had stolen from houses. When he was asked about Libby, he denied having ever seen her in his life. But when the CCTV was put to him, he changed his story, saying he had picked her up that night to help her, calling himself a good Samaritan, and offered to take her home. He said he drove her to Oak Fields and then drove off. He then went back to his house where he had a bath and watched pornography on his phone. It wasn't quite an admission, but it was enough to at least place him at the scene, and given what the residents had said about the screams, they knew there was far more to this story. Detectives said they felt this was probably no longer a missing persons case and that Libby had been met with harm. They had enough to formally charge Pavel with 13 sexual offenses from various points in time, but they were told there still wasn't enough to link him directly to Libby. 7 weeks after Libby had gone missing, the case would take a huge shift. A fisherman in the Humber estuary found a badly decomposing body floating in the water. Around the neck was a little necklace with the letter L on it. Testing confirmed that Libby had been raped before being killed. Her body was so severely decomposed that it was not possible to determine a cause of death, and it was unconfirmed whether she was already dead when she went into the water or not. The pathologist said she could have died from asphyxiation or drowning, but could not be certain. But police felt confident that her body had been pushed into the river hole behind the fields, and had floated out into the river Humber. Everyone was devastated, and Lisa was even more upset when she found out where her daughter's body had been found. Libby had a huge fear of water and wasn't a strong swimmer. Wondering whether she was alive or not when she went into the river only added to the heartbreak, Lisa said. As word started to spread that this was now a murder inquiry, Lisa posted to Facebook and said, "I cannot thank you enough, my darling pie, for making me a mummy, for choosing me to be your mummy. I kept you safe for as long as I could, and I am so sorry I could not keep you safe on that night. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." It was now August 2019, 7 long months since Libby had first gone missing. Pavel was now due in court to face the other charges, which he was pleading not guilty to. However, he changed his plea last minute and entered a plea of guilty to 9 counts in total, 4 counts of voyeurism, 2 counts of outraging public decency, and 3 counts of burglary between 2017 and 2019. He was sentenced to 8.5 years, but this was reduced to just under 6 after a successful appeal. Authorities were thankful he was now locked up, and they continued their investigations into him without fear of him fleeing the country. All they could do was continue to build their case against Pavel, looking through quite literally thousands of hours of footage to further solidify his movements on the night that Libby had got into his car. More footage showed him driving back out to the same location at about 2:30 in the morning, just 2 hours after he was initially there with her. He stayed for a few minutes before heading back into town, which is when he exposed himself to the women on the street. This was the final piece they needed. Pavel would have no reason to go back there unless he was concealing things and covering up evidence. More tests also came back after months of waiting. These showed that Pavel's DNA was on and inside Libby's body. Pavel then changed his story, He said that Libby had essentially thrown herself at him and the pair had had consensual sex in the fields before he left her there. But it was clear that this was not the truth, and detectives now had enough to again put forward their case, hoping to be allowed to file charges for rape and murder. While they waited, in October 2019, almost 300 people gathered for Libby's funeral. Just 2 weeks after this, the police made the announcement that they had been hoping to make for so long and one the public had been waiting for. After consulting with prosecutors, Pavel Relevich was charged with the rape and murder of Libby Squire. As he was read the charges in the police car via a translator, he started to laugh, appearing completely unfazed. His own mother said, "I know in my heart that Pavel did not do anything to this girl. He is a good boy who respects women." She added, however, that her heart was breaking for the Squire family and said that if it turned out her son had done something, he should be punished to the fullest extent. Pavel pleaded not guilty, maintaining his story of it being a casual, consensual hookup. And the trial, after many delays due to the pandemic, finally began in January of 2021. The prosecution put forward a damning case. Pavel was a highly dangerous predator whose crimes had escalated to such a degree that he was willing to do anything to fulfill his sexual perversions. He saw women as objects and got a thrill out of frightening them. From the second he saw Libby that night, alone, cold, upset and vulnerable, she was his target. And he knew instantly what he was going to do the second she got into his car. They said if it wasn't Libby, it would have been someone else, sober or intoxicated. On that day or another, he was intent on raping and most likely killing someone, and it just so happened to be Libby on that fateful night. But the defense were focused on the less than 10-minute window he would have had to commit the crime. If his car pulled into the fields at 12:11 and the screams were heard at 12:14 and then he was back out and driving by 12:20, it left a less than 10-minute window for all of this to happen in. But the prosecution said it was absolutely possible given the fact that Libby was probably unable to fight back, unsteady on her feet, and Pavel was incredibly fit and determined in that moment to do what he ultimately did. Prosecutors also said they didn't have to prove that he had done absolutely everything in that small window either. The DNA evidence and the CCTV spoke for itself. Given the fact he returned to the scene 2 hours later anyway, this was the time he could have easily cleaned up the evidence and moved Libby's body. Prosecutors said that it was clear he was always looking for more to push things further, and when breaking into homes and watching women was no longer fulfilling, it would only be a matter of time before he took it further still to satisfy his urges. And the reason he was getting more brazen with his crimes was because he could. He was getting away with it, time and time again. After a difficult trial lasting 2 weeks, the jury began to deliberate. He was found guilty by an 11-1 majority. He was later jailed for life with a minimum term of 27 years. Upon sentencing him, the judge said that Libby did not stand a chance that night and said that Pavel may never be released, and if he is, he will be monitored for the rest of his days. He called the whole case unimaginatively harrowing. If he is successful in his parole applications, he will be in his early 50s. After his conviction, his wife separated from him and moved back to Poland. She maintains to this day that their relationship was nothing but good, and she was horrified when everything came out, as it was not the man she knew. Lisa remains committed to campaigning to change the laws around non-contact sex offenses, asking for harsher sentences. Police joined forces with the Squire family with a campaign that urged people to report what is considered low-level sex offenses. Lisa even had a meeting with the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson, where she argued that whole life tariffs should be automatic for anyone convicted of murder. She said that Boris Johnson told her there aren't the prison spaces. Lisa responded, "Well then build more prisons, it's as simple as that. Anyone who goes out and takes a life should be given a whole life tariff." End of. In 27 years, Libby doesn't come back. I don't get my daughter back. My children don't get to have their sister back. We have a whole life sentence to live. In 2022, Lisa said she wanted to meet with Pavel in prison to talk about what had happened that night. Pavel agreed. "A lot of people don't understand this. I don't hate him. I'm not angry with him. I just want information from him. I don't wish to forgive him. I don't wish to understand why he did what he did. For me, it's very much about finding out how she was in those last 20 minutes of her life." It's actually quite a brave thing for him to do. To agree to see me in the first place is a big thing, and I am grateful. Nothing he can tell me can be worse than what goes on in my imagination, Lisa said. But in February 2023, Pavel retracted the agreement, saying he felt that he had been portrayed as a bad person in the media because of the Squire family, and as a result, he no longer wanted to talk to Lisa. For Lisa, who quite frankly had shown nothing but grace towards him, it was a huge blow, and clearly his way of keeping some element of control until the end. Libby's family have continued to show an unwavering level of decorum and strength, channeling all their energy and efforts into hopefully making changes to the laws and keep Libby's memory alive. Lisa said, "Every morning in that lull between sleep and waking up, I still think life is normal. Then I wake up and remember Libby is gone. Sometimes the grief takes me by surprise, looking at pictures of Libby that I've looked at a million times in tears thinking, why has someone taken this lovely human being?" Christina Renee King earned the nickname Cricket from her family due to her petite stature. She was born in 1972 and resided in Kansas City, Kansas. Christina was married to Christopher Wayne Goodall, a professional roofer, and their relationship was filled with love and affection. In 1988, they joyfully welcomed their first child, April, into the world. 3 years later, their family grew with the arrival of their second daughter, Ashley. Unfortunately, Christopher's occupation couldn't adequately support their family, prompting Christina to seek alternative means of providing for them. Sources indicate that she began soliciting clients for financial assistance in an area known as Central Street, offering escort services. Tragically, Christopher found himself incarcerated at some point, leaving Christina feeling hopeless, despite the societal label she carried. Those who knew her believed she was genuinely a good-hearted individual. However, circumstances forced her into a life on the streets, where she faced the harsh realities of a world that often failed to recognize the humanity behind such labels. Christine experienced a brief period of incarceration, but her recent release from prison marked a somber chapter in her life. Unfortunately, the day after her release would be her last. In 1998, April, who was in 5th grade and celebrating her 10th Christmas, received devastating news. On Christmas morning, a group of boys scavenging for scrap metal in the driveway of an abandoned nursing home made a horrifying discovery. They stumbled upon a partially unclothed body bearing signs of severe beatings and abandonment. The victim had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, with her pants partially pulled down. Nearby, her bra, shoes, and personal belongings were scattered. The victim's face had been brutally disfigured, leaving a gruesome scene. The Kansas City Police Department notified Christina's family, forever altering their lives. The victim was identified as 26-year-old Christina King, and the investigation into her tragic demise and the identity of her assailant began. Penny Barnett, the mother of Christina, consistently followed up with the KCPD in her quest for information. However, unbeknownst to Barnett, the police had actually obtained a lead: a used condom discovered at the crime scene alongside Christina's lifeless body. Unfortunately, there was a significant amount of negligence and incompetence on the part of the police, but I will delve into that later. On one occasion, during a phone call, Detective Terry Marsh treated Penny Barnett so harshly that she ended up hanging up in tears. When her husband inquired about the reason behind her distress, she revealed that Detective Marsh had been insensitive and had used inappropriate language when referring to Christina. The police displayed a clear bias against Christina, as they repeatedly informed the family that she was merely a streetwalker and therefore not a priority. This prejudiced attitude was evident at various points. April, later in life, had the opportunity to view the autopsy photos of her mother and was appalled by the numerous injuries, abrasions, and bruises that covered her body. In 2010, Christopher Goodall passed away, leaving the two girls orphaned. However, even before this tragedy, their family had already been fractured by Christina's untimely death. For 5 years, Ashley and April had been fending for themselves, with Ashley, at just 14 years old, scouring Quindaro in search of the person responsible for her mother's murder. Quindaro, once a thriving settlement, had become an abandoned ghost town and was considered unsafe during the 90s. Ashley found herself in perilous situations, desperately seeking closure. Eventually, she got into a truck with someone she believed had a connection to her mother's killer. This individual was supposedly a suspect because Christina King's cousin and 2 other women had stolen a significant quantity of his illicit substances. However, this was merely a rumor circulating on the streets. Fortunately, he turned out not to be the person Ashley was seeking, and he did not cause her any harm. 2 decades passed without any further progress in the case. Then in December 2021, the family gathered at the intersection of North 27th Street and Sewell Avenue for a prayer vigil and balloon release. The vigil had been organized by Justice for Wyandotte, an advocacy group committed to promoting transparency in law enforcement. The group extended their support to Christina King's investigation as they aimed to assist the loved ones of those who had been mistreated by the legal system. Khadija Hardway, a member of Justice for Wyandotte, took charge of coordinating the entire event. During her address to the attendees, she emphasized the significance of cases like Christina's, highlighting the urgent need for the Kansas Police Department to establish a cold case unit. Hardway urged the new police chief to allocate existing funds towards the establishment of this unit, as she believed it will enhance transparency in addressing both cold cases and ongoing investigations. This plea sparked a transformative response within the KCPD, ultimately leading to a breakthrough in Christina's case. The newly appointed police chief, Carl Oakman, took Hardway's request seriously and wasted no time in fulfilling it. Immediately after being sworn in on January 1, 2021, he made a solemn commitment to establish a cold case unit within the force. True to his word, a year later, in January 2022, Kansas City's first cold case unit became operational, employing 3 dedicated full-time detectives. This unit would play a crucial role in solving long-standing cold cases. Understanding the origins of Justice for Wyandotte is essential. It all began with Pearl Davis, a 43-year-old mother. Born in 1953, Pearl Barnes was Khadija Hardway's cousin and a devoted mother to her 2 young children. Pearl, also known as Semima Musawar, was an active member of the Kansas City Islamic community. She worked tirelessly to provide for her children, offering her services as a skilled seamstress and running a transportation business that catered to the Chillicothe Correctional Facility. Additionally, she worked as an SRS driver, operated a daycare, sold dinners and bean pies, and actively participated in her family's lives, juggling a diverse range of responsibilities. Given her extensive involvement in the community, a sudden disappearance did not go unnoticed by anyone. Regrettably, Pearl's lifeless body was discovered on November 22, 1996, in an unoccupied residence on Lafayette Avenue in Kansas City. The property had previously belonged to her deceased mother. The autopsy conducted on Pearl revealed a horrifying truth. She had been brutally stabbed more than 40 times, her clothing forcibly removed and scattered nearby. The responsibility of investigating this case fell upon Detective Roger Golubsky of the Kansas Police Department. However, Detective Golubsky faced allegations of misconduct as he had abused his position of authority on multiple occasions. From 1983 to 2008, the Kansas Police Department failed to properly investigate a series of similar cases involving women, most of whom were working women of similar ages. These women often found themselves grappling with homelessness, substance addiction, or engaged in escort services. Their tragic fates were marked by brutal methods such as strangulation, asphyxiation, blunt force trauma, or stabbing. Their lifeless bodies were heartlessly abandoned in remote locations or isolated structures. Disturbingly, all of these women were discovered either partially or completely unclothed, with their pants pulled down or shirts pulled off. The victim's clothing was typically found in close proximity. Christina King, too, endured these terrifying circumstances. As time passed and the cases grew cold, it became increasingly evident that something was amiss with Golubsky. Despite his familiarity with most, if not all of the women who had been mercilessly slain, none of the case files indicated his knowledge of these individuals. Furthermore, despite the abundance of potential physical evidence that could have been analyzed, these particular cases received insufficient attention from forensic experts. As a result, Evidence collection was often limited and efforts to identify potential perpetrators through DNA or other forensic means were inadequate. The level of incompetence displayed was truly astounding. In fact, in Christina King's case, the Kansas Police Department received a DNA match with a potential suspect, but failed to conduct a follow-up investigation. Khadija Hardway, moved by the prolonged neglect of Golubsky's victims, Peas for Justice, found inspiration to collaborate with the community in organizing rallies and demonstrations. The objective was to ensure that the unsolved cases, the faces of the affected women, and their stories would not fade into oblivion. Motivated by Pearl's case, she joined forces with like-minded women to establish a nonprofit called Justice for Wyandotte in 2020. The organization worked diligently to combat the department's corrupt individuals. Officers were observed using excessive force, bullying, intimidating, fabricating evidence, wrongfully arresting individuals, and coercing false testimonies to avoid false accusations and imprisonment. Thanks to Justice for Wyandotte, shedding light on the crimes, they exposed the systematic corruption. They brought attention to the case of Lamont McIntyre, who was falsely accused and imprisoned for 23 years for a crime he did not commit. Despite being exonerated in 2017, he never received justice. Golubsky remained free. However, there were still many unresolved issues regarding Golubsky, particularly in victimizing women. During her involvement with the organization, Hardway arranged a meeting with Carl Oatman, a former candidate for chief of police. In this meeting, she highlighted the evident and unacceptable apathy surrounding unsolved cold cases in the community, stressing the enduring impact on Kansas City families and loved ones. She strongly advocated for the establishment of a cold case unit within the Kansas City Police Department. Following the meeting with Oakman, Justice for Wyandotte initiated an awareness campaign and petitioned for the establishment of a dedicated cold case unit, aiming to address the numerous unsolved cases that had occurred in Kansas City since 1965. In 2003, police received a DNA match from the condom found near Christina's body, identifying Gary Davis as the suspect. Surprisingly, he was not immediately questioned, despite being closely monitored by Wyandotte County Community Corrections. Gary Davis, a 52-year-old Kansas City resident, was a truck driver in his early 20s at the time of the alleged incidents involving Christina and Pearl. Due to the nature of his job, it was understandable why he had managed to evade suspicion back then, as he often traveled far from the crime scenes. Although the police were aware of his whereabouts, it took 20 years to finally arrest Davis. The investigation was slow, with a 14-month delay in questioning the suspect, followed by years of silence. After a public appeal for Justice for Wyandotte in 2021, it took another 18 months to process the DNA, form a team, and apprehend the perpetrator. In 2022, the cold case unit connected the dots, confirming that the DNA from both crime scenes matched Gary Davis Sr., the initial suspect. Police also discovered a Facebook page that matched Davis's name and description, containing controversial posts about truck driving and societal double standards. When attempting to contact him, officers found only one operational phone number out of 3 listed with a full voicemail inbox. Finally, in September 2023, Davis was arrested and charged with the murder of Christina King, with bail set $500,000. Importantly, there was no statute of limitations, ensuring that justice could be served regardless of the time that had passed. If convicted, Davis could face life imprisonment. In a surprising turn of events, Wyandotte County District Attorney Mark Dupree and Kansas City Police Chief Carl Oakman jointly conducted a press conference to commend their investigative efforts. Dupree highlighted the relentless work of the detectives, while Oakman underscored the importance of a thorough investigation over the significance of the DNA hit. They both emphasized the meticulous analysis required to ensure the correct suspect was apprehended. Meanwhile, in March 2022, attorney Cheryl Pellet, representing Kansas City, shed light on the corrupt environment within the Kansas Police Department. She issued a statement aiming to indict not only disgraced Detective Roger Golubsky, but the entire culture that enabled his misconduct. Golubsky, responsible for an unjust arrest, faced federal charges, including kidnapping, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Presently, The Kansas Police Department is collaborating with other law enforcement agencies to determine if Davis could be linked to additional homicides in the region or potentially thousands of miles away. Due to his occupation as a long-haul driver, Davis is currently a suspect or person of interest in at least 8 other cases. The establishment of the Cold Case Unit through Justice for Wyandotte led to the resolution of 11 more cases. It is evident that the Kansas Police Department bears responsibility for the delayed arrest, which could have been made years earlier. The department owes the families of the victims an apology and a thorough explanation. The distressed loved ones, particularly Christina's daughters, who sought closure for years, were all victims of the department's incompetence. A young girl disappeared without a trace after leaving her home. She was soon to become the focus of one of the biggest searches in American history. Detectives encountered many unexpected turns during the investigation, and it took them an astounding 62 years to find the answers before they were able to piece together the whole story. Spokane, Washington is the birthplace of Candace Rogers, also known as Candy, who was born on July 18, 1949. The only child in the family, her parents separated soon after she was born. Since her father lived in the same city, they were able to spend a lot of time together. Candy was a typical sweet child who loved playing with her dog, going on walks in the park with her friends, and being in nature. She also dreamed of becoming a member of the Campfire Girls, an all-girls group that was popular in those days and comparable to the Boy Scouts. They went on hikes, picked up a variety of practical skills, and had fun as a group. Candy was ecstatic to finally have the opportunity to join this organization in 1959 when she was just 9 years old. Selling mints was one of the Campfire Girls' duties. They had to go door to door selling the sweets they had been given by the organization to the residents. Candy was scheduled to do this after school on Friday, March 6th. After coming home, she played with her dog, had dinner, and then at approximately 4:00 p.m., she grabbed about 8 boxes of mints and left. Candy intended to give her neighbors candy as she strolled through the neighborhood streets. Other girls were also expected to visit homes in this neighborhood, but in order to prevent running into each other and giving candy to the same people, they had pre-designated certain streets. Her mother started to worry a few hours later since Candy still had not come back. She was noticeably running late. She was meant to get home by 6:00 p.m. Her mother made the decision to go outside and look for her as night fell. Candy's grandfather went with them as they strolled around their neighborhood, but Candy was nowhere to be seen. Soon after, a few neighbors, family members, and friends joined the search in an attempt to assist, but they were unable to locate Candy, so Candy's mother called the police. It was already getting dark on the streets by then, and it was becoming more and more obvious that Candy might have suffered some sort of harm. The neighbors were all questioned by the police as soon as they joined the search. It did not take long for them to realize Candy had only sold 1 box of mints. This suggested that she might have experienced something soon after leaving her house. But a neighbor said that at around 6:30 p.m., she had seen the girl on a nearby street. This was strange because Candy's mother had already gone looking for her at that point. Strange observations were also shared by Candy's grandfather. A car was speeding and nearly hit him when he was looking for his granddaughter. The car even hit the curb. He was on the same street as the witness who had seen the girl. Sadly, he missed the license plate, but he did recall that it belonged to a green 1953 Ford. Despite providing a description of the vehicle, the police were unable to locate it. By 9:00 at night, they found a number of mint boxes scattered across the road next to a bridge. Fact that Candy was obviously the owner of these boxes added to the general anxiety. The search was concentrated here by the police, who went over the riverbanks and the small area of woods on either side. They searched the area all night long without finding Candy. Local newspapers began to report on Candy's disappearance by morning, and soon the case was being covered by media outlets throughout the state. Child disappearances in the vicinity of their homes were unusual in 1959 because they occurred very infrequently. Candystown's residents were extremely disturbed because they had not dealt with a situation like this in a long time. Police intensified their search early the following day, sending out more officers, mounted police, off-road vehicles, and even military personnel who were using helicopters to scan the area. Many volunteers from the city and surrounding areas also contributed to the search efforts. The search was one of the largest in the nation's history at the time, with over 1,000 people taking part in total. The search area extended 11 miles around the girl's house, but they still could not find her. On the same day, another tragic incident occurred. 3 of the 5 crew members were lost when a helicopter engaged in the search clipped power lines and crashed. Days went by during which time the search produced no results. In an attempt to find Candy, police officers kept working literally around the clock in several shifts. In the early days of the investigation, investigators received about 750 tips. They checked every one of them carefully, but they all ended in dead ends. 15 days later, 2 soldiers from the nearby base went hunting in the woods west of Spokane. When they saw kids' shoes on the ground there, they were instantly reminded of Candy's disappearance, since many military personnel had participated in the search. Were all fully informed about the case. After informing the police of their discovery, Candy's grandfather was shown the shoes. He affirmed that his granddaughter does, in fact, own the shoes. For the search, the police made their way into the woods. In a matter of minutes, one of the officers discovered the girl's body after seeing a foot protruding from the bushes. She lay in the pine branch covered under brush. The cause of death was identified by medical professionals as strangulation. For this, offender had ripped a section of fabric from her skirt. Candy had been bound, based on marks on her hands and feet, even though no ropes were discovered close to the body. It was also determined that the victim had experienced sexual abuse. Police discovered a green car seat covered close to the crime scene during their investigation, but they were unable to determine whether it was connected to the murder. Even though officers detected a tiny purple stain on Candy's clothing that had a grape-flavored chewing gum odor, were unable to link it to the case. When the police could find no solid leads that would lead them to the murderer, they searched for any hints. As they went through the incoming tips, investigators looked into the potential involvement of hundreds of people, including neighbors, strange individuals, and convicted criminals. They soon turned their attention to Alfred Graves, a 50-year-old man. It was an odd reason that made him a suspect. On the same day that Candy's body was found, he committed suicide. He did it in his car not far from the location of the mint boxes. Additionally, Candy's house was only a few hundred yards away from him. Alfred's car contained a rope and a woman's hairpins, which the police found when they discovered his body. After obtaining a search warrant, investigators proceeded to his home and discovered a plethora of newspaper clippings containing articles about sexual crimes against women and girls. The police also discovered that his wife had confessed to having suspicions about him killing Candy, and that a number of women had accused him of harassing them. Investigators were unable to uncover any evidence connecting Alfred to Candy's murder in spite of this unsettling series of events. Although it seemed hard to prove his guilt, they were hesitant to absolve him of suspicion. Investigators investigated additional suspects, whose numbers continued to rise. A number of months after the murder had a long list of names that filled several pages. The police went through each name carefully, but each time they were unable to locate any proof of their connection. Hugh Morse, a serial killer, was another suspect that the police later had. He was taken into custody in 1961 on a number of charges, and there was a fascinating reason why he was made a suspect. It is remembered that Hugh used to chew grape-flavored gum nonstop. That something akin to it was discovered on Candy's clothing. The fact that he murdered 2 women in Spokane a few months after Candy passed away gave rise to additional suspicions. Hughes started committing crimes at a young age. After being arrested for the first time for abusing a woman, he was merely let go from the army, where he was serving at the time with no real repercussions. He later served just 6 months in prison after committing several robberies in Los Angeles. Following his release, he used the promise of ice cream to entice 2 8-year-old girls to a remote location. After abusing them sexually, he was arrested once more. He was surprisingly able to stay out of jail. He was admitted to a mental health facility after a medical commission declared him to be a sexual psychopath. He was freed by the doctors after 2 years, who thought he was healed. After moving to Spokane, Hugh began breaking into women's windows. He killed and assaulted the 28-year-old woman after breaking into her home in November 1959. A decade of months later, he went into the home of a 69-year-old woman and did the exact same thing he had done to the previous victim. A month later, he attacked another woman, stabbing her several times, but she survived. He fled the city after committing these crimes, and in the months that followed, he committed countless more crimes, including stabbing women and girls with a knife, forcing them into sexual relationships, and killing 2 more people. Hugh moved frequently between states and cities up until the FBI took up his case. He was quickly apprehended after being placed on the list of the top 10 most wanted criminals in the nation. Hugh tried to take his own life in his cell after receiving multiple life sentences, but the guards intervened to save him, and he went on to fulfill his sentence. Detectives in Candy's case paid him multiple visits in prison, but he denied any involvement. In addition, he underwent a polygraph examination, which demonstrated his honesty. However, because of its dubious accuracy, this tool is worthless in court. Hugh was the police's top suspect due to his biography and the fact that he was a Spokane resident at the time of the murder, but he insisted on denying any involvement, and there was insufficient evidence to connect him to the crime. Police later turned their attention to another suspect, Howard Barnett, a 49-year-old man. He was taken into custody in February 1960 on allegations of sexually abusing the young girl. He committed suicide in his Spokane police station cell a few days after the arrest. He had previously scrawled the words, "I have a sin before the Lord," in his own blood on the wall. Only after her husband's passing did his wife find out about his arrest. She questioned the police, asking if he had killed Candy. Investigators started looking into his possible involvement, but they were unable to uncover any proof of his guilt. The fact that Howard lived on the victim's neighboring street kept him as one of the primary suspects. Police pursued this case for many years, looking into additional suspects and obtaining fresh leads. They were contacted at one point by a woman who said she had seen a green car following Candy the day she vanished. Once more, the investigators concentrated their efforts on finding this particular vehicle, but this did not produce any noteworthy outcomes. It was peculiar, nevertheless, that the woman disclosed this information so long after the crime. This case was periodically reopened in the decades that followed, but investigators were always at a loss. It is interesting to note that in addition to looking for fresh leads, they also had to resist false accusations. 13 people came forward with confessions to Candy's murder, but the police found that they were all lying. These people were limited to repeating information from the newspapers and were unable to offer any information that the murderer would be aware of. Remarkably, these kinds of actions are frequent and prominent instances of people confessing to crimes they did not commit. The police department had many detectives come and go over the years, all trying to solve this crime. Not just in their city, but throughout the entire state, Candy's murder stood out as one of the most well-known and enigmatic cases. It had a big effect on a lot of people. Parents felt comfortable letting their kids play outside prior to the murder, but many had second thoughts about safety following this case. When this case was reopened in the early 2000s, a new detective made the decision to employ contemporary tools. Luckily, the police had meticulously gathered and stored all the evidence in 1959, which made it possible for specialists to locate a sample of male semen on Candy's clothing. Examining the sample proved very difficult, especially since it had been stored for several decades. However, experts were able to extract the DNA profile after much work, and they uploaded it to the FBI database, but sadly, there was not a single match. Additionally, investigators cross-examined the profile using samples from a number of suspects. However, none of them were identified as Candy's murderer. Many people were certain that Hugh Morse was responsible for the murder over the years, but the forensics showed he was unrelated to the incident. Consequently, the investigation came to a dead end once more. Although the perpetrator of Candy's sexual assault and death provided the police with a DNA sample, identifying them remained a difficult task. When the case was reopened in 2021, a new detective made the decision to use genetic genealogy, an innovative method of DNA analysis. The detective hoped that this method, which had been used to solve hundreds of cold case cases, would finally put an end to one of the longest-running investigations. He made contact with multiple laboratories that specialize in this analysis, only to be met with disappointment once more. In order to apply this technique, specialists had to look at the original DNA sample. Despite numerous efforts, every laboratory came to the conclusion that the sample had deteriorated too much to allow for the extraction of the required data. Suddenly, a long-awaited breakthrough materialized as the detective turned to face the final laboratory. With the use of cutting-edge instruments, the experts successfully examined the sample, providing them with the essential profile of the offender. They meticulously searched for the DNA owner's distant relatives by uploading the profile to genealogical databases. They examined thousands of people before focusing on one particular family. After looking into this family, they concluded that one of the three brothers' DNA samples was most likely the one in question. But now there was a new problem because the three had passed away. Still, the specialists and investigators learned that one of the brothers had a daughter, and the authorities got in touch with her. Even though the woman was horrified that her father might have killed the young child, she agreed to help without thinking twice. She gave the experts a sample of her own DNA, and they verified that she was closely related to the person whose semen was discovered on Candy's clothing. These findings allowed detectives to quickly secure a court order authorizing the exhumation of her father's grave. After 62 years since the murder, the culprit's identity was eventually made public thanks to experts' extraction of a DNA profile from his remains. The man's name was John Hoff. The results of the analysis showed that Candy's clothing and John's DNA were completely matched. John Hoff was never on that list, even though there were hundreds of suspects over the years. Detectives looking into his biography found evidence of his involvement in other crimes. He was 20 years old and lived less than a mile from Candy's home at the time of her murder. In addition, he was an army soldier who was stationed close to the location where the girl's body was found. He attacked a woman 2 years after the murder, bound her, sexually assaulted her, and tried to kill her, but she lived. After being detained, John was only given a 6-month prison sentence. Furthermore, he received a humiliating discharge from the army. John began a family after being freed, with 2 sons and 2 daughters. He continued to live an apparently normal life, staying off the police radar. John had multiple job changes. He once sustained a severe chemical burn to his face while working in a food packaging plant, which left a permanent scar. 11 years after Candy was killed, in June 1970, John ended his own life by hanging himself without leaving a note. Was also established by the police that the victim may have known him. Was friends with his sister, who was 10 years old at the time. Years later, she told detectives that after her friend was murdered, she cried in her brother's arms, unaware that he was the one who killed Candy. Regretfully, the girl's parents passed away before the killer's identity was made public. 4 years after the tragic event, in 1963, Candy's father took his own life. Her mother passed away in 2006. He may not have been able to deal with the loss of his own daughter, although this is still a mystery. However, this case was ultimately resolved, making it one of the longest inquiries. It involved different generations in addition to different detectives over a span of 62 years. There was only one police officer who had been involved in the 1959 investigation present at the press conference when the killer's name was revealed. He expressed gratitude to God for granting him the opportunity to live a long life and discover the truth. Regarding John's daughter, at first, she found it hard to accept that her father had committed such a horrible act. She later came to terms with this reality and called her father a monster for taking the life of a helpless girl. She regretted that he was not brought to justice while he was alive. Interestingly, John committed suicide exactly when his daughter turned 9, the same age as Candy. We may never know whether there is a connection because it is currently unknown. Houston, Texas, home to Sandra and Jim Melgar, who had been married for over 30 years and lived in a nice, quiet neighborhood on Kelsey Meadows Court. Jim Melgar was born in Guatemala, but immigrated to the United States when he was 3 years old. His family had decided to settle in Houston, where Sandra and her family lived. The two had met in school, with Sandra saying he was funny and charming, loving to make bad jokes and be a goofball. After weeks of him asking her out, She finally agreed to go ice skating with him, and they said the rest was history. They married in 1980, and Jim had started working as a computer programmer, and Sandra owned a medical billing and coding business. Both were very successful but enjoyed a low-key life, their friends said. The couple shared one daughter, Elizabeth, who went by Liz, and Liz said the three of them were as close as they could be. And her parents were best friends and made for each other. The three of them were big travelers and enjoyed things like hiking and fishing, but their love of outdoor activities sadly became a distant memory. Sandra suffered a lot physically with various conditions. She had lupus, epilepsy, hypothyroidism, and she had had hip replacements. Liz said she also saw her mother have violent seizures on many occasions, which was terrifying for the whole family. Jim was desperate to help his wife and spent whole days researching her conditions, trying to find treatments and cures. One of Sandra's friends said there were times that she didn't feel safe driving. She was afraid her seizures might come on, so she depended on him for a lot of day-to-day activities. On December 22, 2012, Jim and Sandra were out and about. Not only was Christmas just around the corner, the couple had recently celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary and decided that today was the day to celebrate. They went out for dinner at their favorite Mexican restaurant. At around 9:30 p.m., Jim picked up some drink mixers at CVS, and sometime after the couple arrived home, they made their drinks and snacks and spent some time in the jacuzzi in their bathroom. They talked about what they wanted to do with their future, whether they would sell their home or not, and whether they would hopefully travel one day. Jim was just 5 months away from retirement and was keen to make lots of plans to fill up his time. They also spoke about the following day. Jim's family were coming over for a small party to celebrate their anniversary and catch up before Christmas. Sandra recalled that suddenly the couple's 4 dogs started barking, so Jim got up to go and see what was going on. After about 15 minutes, he still wasn't back, but the dogs seemed quieter, so she decided to get out and start getting ready for bed, heading for the closet next to the bathroom. December 23, 2012, 7 a.m. One of the Melgar's neighbors noticed that the couple's garage door was open, which instantly struck him as odd. It didn't close all day, and no one went in or came out that anyone could see. At about 4:30 p.m., Jim's family arrived at the house for dinner. Herman, Jim's brother, knocked on the door, but was met with silence. Jim's black truck was parked in the driveway. As the garage door was still open, he could see Sandra's silver car parked inside. He went through the garage and entered the house that way, unlocking the front door for everyone else. Inside, they called out for Sandra and Jim, but it was painfully quiet. Herman said all the blinds were still closed, the house felt stuffy, and there was a strange heaviness to it. The couple's dogs then started barking, and Herman's daughter turned to her dad and said, "Something doesn't feel right." The family tentatively started making their way through the home, calling out as they went. Suddenly, Herman heard Sandra's muffled voice coming from upstairs. He ran up and through the master bedroom and the bathroom that tagged onto it. Near the jacuzzi was a small walk-in closet. In front of the closet door was a chair, which was propped up under the handle. When he moved the chair and opened the door, he saw Sandra lying on the floor inside the closet, her arms and feet bound by 2 scarves. Herman tried for a minute to untie her before running to get scissors because the knots were too tight. He then discovered his brother Jim in another closet tagging onto the master bedroom, about 30 feet away from where Sandra was found. He was naked, badly beaten, and had been stabbed many times. Blood covered the walls and furniture. His legs had been tied with a telephone cord, and a rope was loosely wrapped around his chest. Just before 5 p.m. authorities were on scene, but just 2 minutes after they arrived, 52-year-old Jim Melgar was pronounced dead. He had more than 50 injuries in total and was covered in defensive wounds on his hands and arms, including 31 knife wounds. His skull had been bludgeoned too. An expert said that his defensive wounds showed he had attempted to fight off his attacker rather than run away. Through tears, Sandra told the paramedic that she last remembered it being about 1 a.m., and after that, her mind was totally blank. She said she had no idea that 15 hours had passed, but as she had woken up with soiled underwear, she knew it must have been a significant period of time. As authorities started moving through the home, which was now a major crime scene, They saw that drawers had been pulled open. Jewelry boxes had been gone through, and there was a wallet and a purse out and on the bed. Sandra and Jim's daughter Liz said there were prescription pills missing and a TV from one of the bedrooms. Despite the state of the home and what she said, nothing was listed as missing or stolen in the police reports. Inside the jacuzzi was a white blouse and a kitchen knife they determined to be the murder weapon. Police also found Jim's loaded gun in the closet where he had been found, and the couple's safe, which was still locked but had blood on the handle. Sandra said that her head was pounding and her body was aching as if she had had a seizure, a feeling she said she knew all too well. She was checked over, but they found no signs of her head being hit. They couldn't find any significant marks or abrasions to her arms or hands either, something the police found a little odd, given how tight the knots were and how long she would have been tied up. She was taken to the hospital for further checks but quickly discharged herself, and after this, she was taken to the Harris County Sheriff's Office to answer some questions. It was a very odd scene, and police suspected that something was off about Sandra's version of events. She said she had no idea what happened past getting out of the jacuzzi and couldn't remember a thing. She said she definitely didn't see or hear anything happen to Jim and had no idea that he had been killed. She told police that she had headed into her closet, started applying some lotion, and then completely blacked out, putting it down to either hitting her head or being struck by someone. An unknown amount of time later, she came around and realized she was bound. She called for help and then must have passed out again after having what she thought was an epileptic seizure. She said the reason she felt this was because her body felt the same way it always did after having one. She said the only thing that had been odd about that day was as they were driving home just hours before, a car they didn't recognize looked like it was trailing them. But investigators were still dubious about her story. They couldn't understand how she hadn't seen or heard anything, especially given how violent the scene was and how loud Jim likely would have been. He was fighting off whoever the attacker or attackers were for a while, given his defensive wounds, and this could not have been quiet. They also couldn't fathom why someone would kill Jim, but leave her alive and virtually unscathed with just a few bruises and small scratches. It was such a different scene in both closets. None of the neighbors reported hearing a commotion or the dogs barking either. There was nothing out of the ordinary to them. One neighbor was even outside working in his garage until 1 a.m. and said he didn't hear or see anything suspicious near the house or on the street. No noise, no cars, no dogs, nothing. He was surprised that a home invasion had actually happened right under his nose, especially while feeling he was more of a target. To be honest, if anybody was going to get robbed, it would probably be me, because the garage door was wide open. I'm there. It was just me messing with my stuff. If somebody were going to come down and try and rob somebody, they'd be like, "Look at that dude. Let's just go in there, tie him up and take all his stuff," he said. Officers said that there were no signs of a forced entry, and the drawers inside looked like they had been neatly pulled out, emptied and placed around, as opposed to someone opening them in a hurry and hunting for valuables. They found it odd that the murder weapon was left at the scene in the jacuzzi, the murder weapon that had come from inside the Melgar's kitchen. They also thought that she could have very easily pulled the chair against the door using a bath mat or a pillowcase. And they noted that neither Jim nor Sandra had any ligature marks, something they would have expected to see. This indicated to them that Jim had been tied up after death as opposed to being restrained before being killed. Despite the fact that things were missing, to Liz and Sandra, authorities and experts' overall conclusion was that the evidence was inconsistent with a home invasion and the scene had been staged by Sandra. They asked if she would take a voluntary polygraph test, which she declined. She said that she was freezing cold and shaking and was worried that this would work against her. Detectives had made their mind up about what had happened that night, and on December 24th, they called the Harris County District Attorney's Office, requesting to file murder charges against Sandra Melgar. But the DA's office declined, saying there was a lack of evidence. Testing from the scene was starting to come back, and it showed there was no blood apart from Jim's present, which was unusual, but an expert said they could not exclude the possibility of someone leaving the home essentially clean. There were male and female DNA profiles discovered on some door handles, dresser drawers, the handle to the safe, and the scarves that had been tied around Sandra. These profiles did not match any members of the Melgar family, but they weren't fully tested. To determine who the DNA was linked to, Detectives then received a message from Liz saying she had found a backpack with an Xbox in it in the garage. She said the only explanation for this was someone had bagged it up to steal it and then dropped it or left it on the way out. An unknown female DNA profile came back on this as well. A few days later, someone called in with a tip, saying after thinking about that night long and hard they had recalled something. They said they had seen a man acting strangely around the neighborhood that night. It turned out that this man was Chad Sullivan, a convicted thief who was just out of prison on assault charges. Although police knocked on his door twice to talk to him and left a card asking him to get in contact, he never responded, never opened the door, and thus he was never questioned. A few weeks later, Sandra said her memory was finally starting to come back in bits and pieces, and she had a flashback to a young Hispanic woman in the closet talking to someone behind her that Sandra couldn't see. But investigators were still not convinced. They carried on building their case against Sandra over the next 18 months, believing that it just didn't add up, didn't make sense, and didn't seem plausible for this to have been a robbery gone wrong. In the summer of 2014, almost 2 years after Jim was killed, Sandra Melgar was indicted on first-degree murder charges. Her defense team argued that there was no physical evidence against her and that everyone was missing a very key part. There was simply no motive at all. They said, this idea that something must have happened and then she went crazy and subjected him to over 50 blunt force and sharp force injuries is just impossible. They maintained that someone or several people broke into the house via the back door to rob it and Jim ended up dead in the process. They questioned why Sandra was found with none of Jim's blood on her. If the attack had been as violent as it was, surely she would have something on her. But her hands and nails were clean and her nails were unbroken. She also had no injuries aside from some bruising on her upper arms, something they said they would have expected to see a lot more of given the crime. They also pointed out Sandra's various physical ailments and said there was no way she could have physically overpowered him in the first place and gotten away unscathed. And the fact that there was an unknown male and female DNA found in the house that was not fully tested should be enough to create doubt for the jury. And if there was anything that put doubt in the jury's minds that someone else could have done this, they couldn't find Sandra being guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Finally, her defense team pointed out that the lead investigator on the case was later forced to resign after backdating a search warrant in an unrelated murder case. It was purely a badly put together, circumstantial case in their eyes. But the prosecutors said her story just didn't make the slightest bit of sense and put forward two motives for murder. They said that she had wanted a divorce, but due to them both being Jehovah's Witnesses, she was worried she would be pushed out if she went ahead with this. But Sandra's family and friends said she never made any mention of wanting to separate from her husband. The second motive pointed to the $250,000 life insurance policy that Jim had, which Sandra would have benefited from. They claimed that was entirely possible that Sandra had tied Jim up before he was stabbed, perhaps positioning it as some sort of sex game, or she stabbed and bludgeoned him before he was tied up, hence the reason the knots were only loose as they weren't needed to actually restrain him. She then spent time staging the scene, finishing with tying her hands and feet. They said that one of her nails was slightly cloudy, which pointed to a cleanup happening. Celestina Rossi, a blood spatter analyst and crime scene reconstructionist, testified for the prosecution. She said that, in her experience, the crime scene didn't match that of a home invasion. There were no signs of a forced entry and dresser drawers weren't scattered throughout the bedroom. She also said that the candle on Jim's nightstand was still lit, and this was a sign that there was no struggle near the closet where Jim was killed, as would likely be expected in these type of situations. She agreed with the medical examiner's report that all of Jim's wounds were defensive and noted that his gun was still loaded and untouched, just inches away from his body. She said as it was his wife that was attacking him, he would be keen to disarm her rather than kill her in self-defense. And the chair blocking the door from the outside, the prosecution along with police argued it was entirely possible for her to put a pillowcase under the chair to pull it against the door and shut herself in. This was not something that needed to be done by someone else. In August 2017, a jury spent 8 hours deliberating. On the first day they were split down the middle in their decisions, but on the second day they had reached a verdict. Sandra Melgar was found guilty and sentenced to 27 years in prison for the murder of her husband Jim. Liz said an audible gasp went through the entire courtroom as the verdict was read out. Sandra almost passed out and sat sobbing. She said that the thought of her mother killing her father had briefly crossed her mind, but she no longer thought this was possible, and no one in court thought she would have actually been found guilty. Both Jim and Sandra's family support her claims of innocence and believe her story completely. I tried to look at the evidence. I tried to be unbiased about it, which is difficult because these are my parents. In the end, still want justice for my dad. I want to know who did this, and it was not my mother. I know that she did not do this. I'm going to continue to fight until we can prove that, Liz said. The prosecution were happy with the result and the sentence given and said she told a story that didn't make sense. It didn't add up and the jury didn't believe it. The jury foreman would later say a couple of months later Sandra's team filed an appeal requesting a retrial. This was denied. In 2018, famed defense attorney Kathleen Zellner announced she would be taking the case to help Sandra, believing in her innocence. Kathleen Zellner has helped exonerate 19 people who were wrongfully convicted and garnered major attention from the Netflix series Making a Murderer when she started working with Stephen Avery after he was convicted of the 2005 murder of Teresa Holbach. Another appeal for Sandra was lodged, but this was denied again with one of the judges saying, in late 2022, the Innocence Project of Texas announced that they too would be picking up Sandra's case. She has spoken from prison and tells the same story she always has. It is really strange, confusing, and sad case, which has been divisive right from the beginning. Many believe that Sandra is a killer who masterminded the whole operation and staged the scene to get away with murder, whereas many others believe she is just as much of a victim. The police decided that it was her from the get-go. They created the narrative, and the killer or killers are still out there. With numerous groups, podcasts, and websites campaigning for her release, and with others fighting to keep her in, it's clear to see just how polarizing this case and conviction has been. Whatever anyone's thoughts are, there are still so many unanswered questions about that night. Is the real killer behind bars, or has someone been wrongfully convicted? Sandra Melgar will be eligible for parole in 2031. If she is not granted parole, her release date is August 2044. She will be 85 years old. Jim Melgar was a kind, hardworking, and thoughtful man with a great sense of humor and a big heart. He is missed dearly by everyone, and with so many questions about what happened still lingering, family and friends say it only becomes harder to find closure, when that was already so tough to get in the first place. On January 10, 1984, 50-year-old Patricia Smith's body was found in the Lakewood condo she shared with her daughter and grandchildren just west of Denver, Colorado. She had been assaulted and then fatally beaten with a hammer. Male DNA was collected from her body, nearby carpeting, and on a blanket that was used to cover her body. Patricia used to be a flight attendant. She was described as an outgoing, friendly, sophisticated woman who had recently started her own interior decorating business. At the time of Patricia's discovery, the Denver metropolitan area was plagued by a 12-day crime spree. Multiple victims in the area suffered the same fate as Patricia. In 2010, as DNA technology was getting more advanced, investigators were able to confirm that it was the same man responsible for the multiple hammer attacks in Denver back in 1984. One of the other hammer attacks that was committed by the man responsible for what happened to Patricia is the attacker on the Bennett family. This is a photo of the family. The unknown man was responsible for taking 3 of their lives just 6 days after he ended Patricia's life. Bruce Bennett had married his wife, Deborah, before joining the Navy, where he served at Pearl Harbor between 1976 and 1980 as a sonar analyst. Upon the completion of his service commitment, Bruce and Deborah moved to Aurora, Colorado. There, Bruce worked at a family-owned furniture store and helped Deborah raise the 2 daughters. They led a quiet life. They worked hard and stayed home at night. Bruce enrolled in a local college where he trained to be an air traffic controller with an eye toward landing a job at an airport in the area. These dreams came to a shattering end on January 15, 1984, between midnight and 6 a.m., when an intruder entered the Bennett home. Investigators believe Bruce confronted the attacker on the stairs. Deep gashes were later found on his arms, and body and blood was found up and down the staircase. The following morning, Deborah's body was discovered in her bedroom, while 7-year-old Melissa was found in her bed. The young daughter, Vanessa, then aged 3, was in bed when her grandmother came to the house and discovered the carnage. She survived the attack, despite suffering a shattered jaw and pelvis, among other horrific injuries. More than 500 people were questioned during this initial phase of the investigation, and while no arrests were made, detectives never stopped looking for the person responsible. 6 years after DNA technology linked Patricia's case with the Bennett family in 2016, investigators used age-processed DNA phenotyping, a technique developed by Parabon Nanolabs and dubbed Snapshot, to try and move the investigation forward. The result was a pair of images, one a likeness of a possible suspect at the time, and a second, aged to approximate his appearance in 2016. After the flurry of activity spurred by the snapshot pictures quieted down, the Bennetts and Patricia slid from the headlines again. Finally, in August 2018, investigators announced that they caught the man responsible for all the hammer attacks when his DNA scored a hit on the combined DNA index system. The man is Alex Ewing. In 2018, he was already behind bars for brutally beating a couple in Nevada with an axe handle. In August 2021, a jury in Arapahoe County District Court found Ewing guilty of taking the lives of Bruce Deborah and Melissa Bennett. I have seen all kinds of evil and wickedness. Nothing compares to the level of depravity that your actions show in this case, said Judge Darren Vale at Ewing's sentencing. There is no punishment that is too harsh for you. I will do everything in my power to make sure you never draw a free breath ever again, he added. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years for each crime. Be served consecutively to his prison term in Patricia's case proved to be more difficult. In October of 2021, a Jefferson County Court judge declared a mistrial after granting a defense request for Ewing to undergo a competency evaluation. He passed that test, leading to a launch of a second trial that concluded in April 2022 with a guilty verdict. Afterward, First Judicial District DA Alex Keene, whose office prosecuted Ewing, issued the following statement. We truly appreciate the jury's service in this difficult case, and our thoughts are with the family of Patricia Smith as they finally see justice for her horrific demise over 3 decades ago. Today's verdict is the result of significant efforts and dedication by law enforcement, scientists, the witnesses who testified, and our staff, without whom this outcome would not have been possible. On April 12, 2022, Alex Ewing was sentenced to another life sentence for what he did to Patricia Smith. Patricia's daughter, Cherry Letton, had this to say, "It was not a human that took my mother's life. It was an evil monster who does not deserve to walk this earth." Ewing is not expected to be tried in several other attacks he is suspected of carrying out in the Denver area around the same time. One of those incidents was a home invasion on January 4, 1984, during which a man beat a sleeping couple with a hammer. Shortly after Alex Ewing took the lives of the Bennett family, authorities arrested him in Kingman, Arizona for breaking into a man's home and beating him with a slab of concrete. Due to overcrowding in Arizona, Ewing was held at a detention center in Utah before his trial. In August 1984, Ewing was en route back to Arizona when the deputies transporting him stopped in Henderson, Nevada for a restroom break, and he escaped. That very night, Ewing broke into yet another home in Nevada and beat a couple with an axe handle, nearly ending their lives. He was arrested 2 days later and spent the next 3 decades in Nevada prison system before DNA connected him to the other crimes in 2018. On December 18, 1996, a little after 9 a.m., workers at the Pleasant Valley Memorial Park Cemetery in Annandale, Virginia discovered the body of a woman. She was found near the section of the cemetery where infants are buried. The workers then called police. It was discovered that she put a bag over her head and secured the bag with tape. She was wearing a red shirt, a sweater, blue pants, and an Eddie Bauer jacket. An 8-inch Christmas tree and her backpack were found next to her. She was also found to be listening to a cassette tape using a tape player and headphones. 2 notes were found with one saying, "Now I lay me down to sleep, soon to drift to the eternal deep, and though I shall die and shall not wake, sleep sweeter will be than this life I forsake." The second message read, "Deceased by own hands, prefer no autopsy. Please order cremation with funds provided. Thank you, Jane Doe." 2 $50 bills were found with her. One of the bills was for the cemetery, The other bill was for the coroner. Authorities determined that she really did take her own life by suffocation, but they were unable to identify her. The unknown woman was nicknamed the Christmas Tree Lady. She was reported to be a Caucasian woman, had a height of around 5 feet, and was between 50 and 70 years old. Hoping to find a match, authorities looked at many nearby cases which involved missing people, but they failed. In 2000, a colored sketch of the Christmas Tree Lady was released. Unfortunately, no one came forward who knew her, and she would remain unidentified for many more years. Then, in 2022, investigators partnered with Othram Incorporated, a Texas lab, to help identify the woman. In January, they conducted tests using DNA. The tests were made possible by donations. In May of 2022, Othram discovered that a man, David Meyer, could be the Christmas Tree Lady's brother. Investigators contacted David, and he told them that he did have a missing sister. After David looked at the drawing of the Christmas Tree Lady, he was not able to say whether or not she was his sister, because the last time he saw her was decades ago. The detectives then went to his other sister, Clough. Clough said that it was definitely their sister. DNA was taken from Clough, and the Christmas Tree Lady was then identified as their sister, 69-year-old Joyce Marilyn Meyer Summers. This is what we know about her. She was born in Davenport, Iowa on July 20th, 1927 and had 4 siblings. Joyce relocated to Los Angeles to work at a magazine. After she left the magazine, she taught 2nd grade at a local Los Angeles elementary school. In the 1960s, Joyce and her mother had an argument where she felt that her mother was treating her terribly. Joyce then moved to Seattle and married, but later divorced in 1977. She then moved to Tucson, Arizona, where her siblings visited her. This was last time they saw her. Her siblings later hired a private investigator to locate her, but this failed. In the early 1990s, Joyce's brother traveled to Tucson in an attempt to locate her, only to find the trailer she had lived in abandoned. In it, he discovered a book, The Target Child, written by Joyce. In the book, she wrote about her supposed abusive upbringing. Major Ed O'Carroll had this to say: after decades of wondering what had happened to their loved one, Joyce's family is finally at peace. Thanks to the dedicated work of several generations of FCPD detectives, anonymous donors, and Othram, our detectives never stopped working for Joyce and her family. Advances in technology will continue to help close cases and prove answers to victims' families. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.